Hello children, back to our class. Till now we have discussed about the pathway of respiration and how the transportation of gases, that is carbon dioxide and oxygen, takes place in our body. Now the next topic is transportation of gases. We have already discussed that the oxygen, whatever we are breathing, will combine with hemoglobin. It won't, means here the oxygen will not mixes with the blood on its own. The protein which is present in the blood helps the oxygen to combine with the blood and helps in the transportation of gases, that is the oxygen, to different cells in our body. Same as in the previous chapter we have discussed the chlorophyll which is present in the chloroplast. It is made up of a pigment. It is made up of a protein called magnesium. Same as the hemoglobin also contains heme, a protein which requires iron. So it is essential for the transportation of gases. Again, the same reverse, that is the carbon dioxide which is present in the cell, is given back to the again lungs, to the same blood, means the transportation of gases. So when these oxygen which we are breathing, means which is filled with the lungs, first it will enter into our lungs and is filled with our lungs, and through the blood capillaries this oxygen is transferred to the blood and transferred to different cells. So when it is going to mix, means the oxygen when combines with hemoglobin, we call it as oxyhemoglobin, which is dark, just we can mention it as, which is somewhat black when compared to deoxygenated blood, means which contains carbon dioxide. That is the deoxygenated blood. So the oxygenated blood, which we call it as oxyhemoglobin, means oxygen plus hemoglobin. Here Hb represents hemoglobin, and oxygen when it combines it calls oxyhemoglobin. We call it as oxyhemoglobin, means here the lungs are filled with the oxyhemoglobin, and that oxyhemoglobin is transferred to different cells. If you see the same reverse, which while going we call it as oxyhemoglobin, and again when it results, which does not contain oxygen. So see, this oxyhemoglobin when it reaches the tissues or cells, the oxygen is taken by the cells to perform their activities, to perform their metabolic activities of the cell, and each and every cell is responsible for doing some work. So when it receives oxygen, not only oxygen but also the food materials which are absorbed from the stomach, it releases energy. So here the hemoglobin, when it reaches the cells, it becomes heme, again hemoglobin, and oxygen is given to the cells. Again the carbon dioxide blood is again brought to the lungs. So here this is the transportation of gases, how the blood will absorb the oxygen from the lungs, from the alveoli, again it is sent to the cells. Again the carbon dioxide is brought back to the lungs, which is exhaled by us. Next one is gases exchange. You know, already we have discussed how the exchange of gases takes place. Here the oxyhemoglobin, when it reaches the cells, means the oxygen is released into the cells. Then what happens? By absorbing that oxygen and the food, the cell will generate some amount of energy to perform its activities. Without energy, we can't do any work. You can see that without food for few hours, can you do your activities normally? You will feel hungry, means our energy levels will become down. So to produce that energy, what we will do? Again we will have our meals. It may be lunch, dinner or breakfast. So again we are recharging ourselves. We are getting recharged by taking the required food. Means the food is present in the stomach. Means again while breathing, the oxygen combines with that food to generate the energy. So when oxyhemoglobin reaches the cells, the oxygen is released in the cells. Means the cells will absorb the oxygen along with the food and it generates energy and also carbon dioxide, which is brought up again to the lungs, and also water. It may be in the form of sweat or in the form of exhaling breath, what we are exhaling. Next one is the cellular respiration. First of all, what is cellular respiration? You know that till now we have learnt about respiration. There is the inhalation and exhalation by utilization of food. Means why we are saying utilization of food means each and every cell requires energy of food to get energy. So that's why we call it as respiration. When this respiration occurs in cells, we call it as cellular respiration. So when the respiration takes with the cell, we call it as cellular respiration. So each and every cell requires oxygen and also food to perform their activities. Again, this respiration is of two types: aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration. We have already learnt in the previous classes. Aerobic respiration means in the presence of oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration means in the absence of oxygen. Good example for aerobic is human beings, every organism, whereas anaerobic respiration, bacteria. There is a fermentation. Good example for anaerobic is the fermentation process that is done by the yeast. If you see in the prokaryotic cell, which does not contain definite nuclear membrane, the cytoplasm, in the cytoplasm itself, the energy is stored, means the cell will perform all its activity. Example for that one is the bacteria. Whereas in the eukaryotic cell, the energy is stored in the cytoplasm and also in the mitochondria. That's why we call mitochondria as powerhouse of the cell. Means here the respiration is in the cells will not take place in the single step. It takes a series of steps to convert that food into energy. It requires a series of steps, and these energy is stored in the ATP, in the form of ATP in the mitochondria. That's why we call mitochondria as powerhouse of the cell. Here ATP is nothing but adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. Here adenosine triphosphate. It is a chemical bond. In the adenosine triphosphate, the phosphates are linked with the chemical bond. When these bonds will broken, the energy will released by the cell, by the mitochondria to supply the energy to the cell. That's why we call energy currency of the cell. ATP is the energy currency of the cell, and each ATP molecule generates or release 7,200 calories of energy. Each ATP molecule will release 7,200 calories of energy. It's important. The energy currency of the cell is the ATP, and also each ATP molecule contains 7200 calories. Next, I will show the flowchart about the two kinds. If the respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, what are the products obtained, and if it takes place in the anaerobic process, what are the substances are produced. If you see the flowchart of the respiration, here the respiration, there is a breakdown of glucose. It won't take place in the single process, in the single step. It requires a series of steps to break the chemical bond between the ATP. So, it requires a series of steps. In the first step, if you see the glucose, what are the food we eat contains glucose. It requires 2 steps for the breakdown of glucose molecules. If you see the glucose, the oxidation of glucose, the first step is the glucose is converted into pyruvate. The oxidation of glucose. By the oxidation of glucose, the glucose is converted into pyruvate in the first step along with some amount of energy. If this glucose molecule consisting of oxygen, means if the oxygen supply is there, or little amount of oxygen is supplied, then it takes place aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, and it releases energy. High amount of energy is released in the aerobic respiration when compared to anaerobic respiration. This is an important point you have to remember. And also carbon dioxide along with the water. So, if you see the glucose, first step it converts into pyruvate. In the second step, by the availability of oxygen, it takes place aerobic respiration, which releases high amount of energy, carbon dioxide and water. We can see this aerobic respiration in plants and animals. Whereas in the aerobic respiration, means if little amount of oxygen is available or nothing, zero amount of oxygen, because absence of oxygen, that is the absence of oxygen, the pyruvate which is formed in the first step takes place anaerobic respiration. In the first step, the glucose is converted to pyruvate. The second step, in the absence of oxygen, it takes place anaerobic respiration. In that, depending upon the organism, it produces lactic acid plus energy. If you see in the bacteria, whereas ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy is produced in some organisms like yeast. You know that yeast is an example for fermentation. That is nothing but what we will see for the process of fermentation of idli and dosha. You can see the gas released by the yeast, that is carbon dioxide. There is nothing but the gas is nothing but carbon dioxide. Because of that carbon dioxide only you can get the fluffiness to the idli, means you can see some gap, and if you see the batter you can see that holes. That is nothing but by the liberation of carbon dioxide by the yeast. So this is about the process of respiration. This is an important flowchart and you have to remember this. Till now we have discussed that human beings perform aerobic respiration, but in some situations we may also perform anaerobic respiration. Sometimes you may experience while doing serious exercises, you may get muscle cramps. Why those muscle cramps will occur? Means continuous performing the activities, that is the exercises, the amount of oxygen supply may not sufficient to our body. Then our body requires, means for the liberation of energy, the food must combine with the oxygen. So to produce that energy, the oxygen is not supplied. Means we have to take more amount of oxygen. So when that oxygen supplement is stopped to produce the required amount of energy, the muscles, means our body, may perform anaerobic respiration for some time and it liberates lactic acid and you may feel muscle cramps. After completing that, you may experience that how your breath will be, how your muscles will get cramps because of these. Means when the aerobic process of respiration is stopped, means availability of oxygen is stopped, then our body also performs, sometimes our body also performs anaerobic respiration and produces lactic acid. Due to the accumulation of this lactic acid in the muscles, we may get muscle cramps. So that is the example of anaerobic respiration. Till now we have discussed about the aerobic respiration. In the next class we will discuss about anaerobic respiration. Try to write the notes. Prepare your own notes in the point wise, which is useful for preparing the test, for preparation of the test. Okay, children, bye. See you in the next class.